Today, it is my pleasure to officially introduce to you Archon, an open source AI agent that literally builds other AI agents. And I've covered it a bit on my channel already, but I haven't given it a proper introduction or shared with you the crazy big ideas that I have for it. I'm going to be using it both as a teaching tool and also to eventually build it into an absolute monster of an AI agent that spins up other agents on demand. And I'm doing it all in public for you to follow along, learn from, and contribute to if you want to be a part of something big. And if we do this right, Archon could easily be one of the most important AI agents out there. Just hear me out on this. Coding is hands down the biggest and strongest use case for AI right now. And I'm not just trying to get you on a hype train. Using AI to code really does seem to be top of mind for everyone, including every company building LLMs. Just look at the huge coding focus for Claude 3.7 Sonnet, DeepSeek R1, Qwen 2.5 Coder. And I am all over this right now because there is a gold mine of opportunities for us to build AI apps that use LLMs to help us write code. Because here's the thing, there are a lot of generalist AI coders out there, like Windsurf, Cursor, and Cline, but not a lot of specialized AI agents that can get the job done really well for a specific framework or tackling specific problems. We have some specialized tools like Bolt and Lovable for creating incredible front ends, but what about an AI coding assistant that creates other AI agents, runs them, and iterates on them? And we need this because it's becoming increasingly clear that AI agents will dominate the landscape of software going forward. And if you can create specialized agents on demand that tackle all of your problems, well then you, my friend, own the world. And that is why I'm building Archon. You can think of it like Bolt, but for agents instead of front ends, and a lot more. So let me show you a demo of it right now, and then stick around because I'll share my crazy vision for the project as well. So Archon can be run in two ways. First, as a standalone app with a dedicated interface that I'll show later, but also, and this is what gets me really excited, you can use Archon as an engine to build AI agents within AI IDEs, like I'm showing Windsurf right here. You can do the same with something like Cursor and Cline as well. And so within my Windsurf, this is using the model context protocol from Claude. I literally have Archon as a tool for Windsurf to use. You can kind of think of it as a sub-agent. When Windsurf realizes it needs that specialized agent intelligence, it'll invoke Archon to generate the code, and then that code will be returned to Windsurf and then implemented straight away in my development environment. It is super neat. And so going over to this interface that I'll cover more later for Archon, I have this service up and running for Archon, which is the core of my MCP server. And then I even have an MCP tab here that shows you for each of these coding assistants the exact configuration to put in for MCP and how to do all that as well. So I make it super easy to get up and running with Windsurf, Cursor, and Cline for Archon. All right, so now let's give Archon a spin in Windsurf. I'm just gonna create a very basic agent right now. In more dedicated videos later on, I'll build out more complex use cases, and it just will make more sense as I build out Archon. So right here, simple AI agent that uses the Brave API to search the web. And we can see right away that Windsurf is getting into using the Archon tools, and now it is actually invoking our agent with this tool call right here. And we'll see in a little bit that we can watch the logs in the Archon UI as well when it's making the request to our MCP server. And the thing that I want to really emphasize here is that you can use a generalist AI coder like Windsurf. Like I can go and reference the Pydantic AI documentation or the LangGraph documentation like this to have Windsurf build these agents with the same frameworks that Archon uses. But because these AI IDEs are so generalist, it never works as well as I want it to. And that's why we need something specialized like Archon that knows how to work with these frameworks through instructions that we give it, through better RAG retrieval from the documentation, so many opportunities that we have to implement these specializations. And so right here, we got the result back from Archon. It told Windsurf the files to create. And so now it's going ahead and creating these all in my development environment, following the exact structure that I tell Archon to produce, where we have this agent right here that is producing literally perfect Pydantic AI code. I mean, I'm just kind of glossing over this right here, but this looks perfect. And then it generates an env.example file. So it thinks about things like our environment variables and the requirements that we have as well, and even generates a README that helps us get started with this agent, which is just absolutely beautiful. And we can even go back here and ask it to iterate on the agent. And then Archon will be invoked again to update the code for the agent. And all the updates that it gives back to Windsurf or your AI IDE will edit the necessary files so you don't don't have to rewrite anything from scratch. And this entire time within the UI for Archon, we can see the logs. Like these are the logs from when we used Archon just now, and then any future iterations will show up here in real time as well. So it's easy to track everything happening in the MCP server as well. It's just such a good combination to use Archon along with an AI IDE, because we don't want to build another VS Code fork. We want to focus on creating Archon as this specialized engine to right now work with Pydantic AI and LangGraph, but also I want to implement in the future basically every framework that we have, like Crew AI, Llama Index, and AutoGen, all of these, so that Archon can be this AI agent generator. And so super cool stuff. It does take a couple of extra credits because you have to use the LLM calls in both Archon and your AI IDE. But if this can stop a lot of hallucinations and make it actually generate agents faster, in the end, that is going to save you a lot of credits. And that's the most important thing, is we want to be developing agents correctly and we want to do it quickly. And so right now I'll show you how to get up and running with Archon. And then also I want to show the crazy ideas that I have to take Archon from its infancy where it is now into something that truly is an absolute monster to generate AI agents on demand. Not only creating the code here, but also iterating autonomously and running these agents itself. That is going to be the dream. So here is the GitHub repository for Archon, which I'll have a link to in the description of this video. And I have covered already on my channel how I built Archon from scratch, so I'll link to that video right here. But essentially, Archon uses a combination of my two favorite frameworks, Pydantic AI and LangGraph, for this agentic workflow that can intelligently build agents much better than general AI coding assistants. And I'm building Archon in iterations for two reasons. First, I'm building in public. I want you to be able to contribute and follow along as I'm building out Archon. And then also I'm building in iterations because I'm using this as a teaching tool to show you how to build more complex agents with Pydantic AI and LangGraph. And so when I have to explain something more complex like this, I want to break it down into simple steps. And so the iterations of Archon are those simple steps. So starting with a simple agent, then implementing LangGraph for a more powerful agentic flow for agent creation, and then I added in MCP support in version 3, and then the most recent version is where I added in that huge Streamlit interface for you to manage everything for Archon. And the reason that I'm focusing on Pydantic AI and LangGraph specifically is because a lot of the other frameworks out there, like LangChain for example, they are what's called an abstraction distraction in my mind. They try to implement so much for you that you lose a lot of that customizability and control that you want when you're building your AI agents. But I don't feel like I lose that with Pydantic AI and LangGraph. I do want to integrate other frameworks at some point though, more on that later, but that's why I'm focusing on these frameworks. And so yeah, there's just so much that you can read here as far as the vision and future iterations of Archon. I'll get into that more in a little bit, but as far as actually getting up and running with Archon, I've made it as easy as I possibly could. So if you scroll down a little bit in the README, you'll see the first option to install with Docker. It is just 3 commands to get up and running. So stinking easy. And you can install with just Python if you want as well, just a couple of more commands. Docker is the preferred way, but either way, you'll have that Streamlit interface up and running that'll walk you through setting up everything for Archon, like the environment variables, your agent service for MCP, your documentation for RAG, and it'll help you knock them out one by one super quickly, so it is very easy to get up and running. And I might do a dedicated video later on where I show how to get Archon up and running from scratch, but I hope that these instructions make it easy enough to do it for yourself, and I know that people have already been doing that. So once you have Archon up and running with Docker or just pure Python, the first tab in the interface is this intro tab that'll get you started with everything that you need to have Archon up and running, either within the chat interface that we have right here in the UI or as an MCP server like I demonstrated earlier. So it walks you through setting up your environment variables, your database, which is using Supabase, the documentation crawling, which is just Pydantic AI right now, but I want to use a lot of other docs later on, and then setting things up for MCP as well. And so each of these tabs, I have poured a lot into making absolutely perfect. So you can set all of your environment variables right here in the UI, for example, so you don't have to do anything with a .env file. And then this helps you set up everything for your database as well, crawling the documentation, making sure you have things set up, that you have your table set up before you crawl the documentation and create everything for RAG. And then we have the documentation tab, which I won't show this right now. It's super cool how you can click this button and it'll run that crawl for AI Python script behind the scenes to crawl the Pydantic AI documentation and then update you in real time as it's processing each page of the docs, and then future sources coming as well. And then we have the agent service that I showed earlier where you can watch the logs for your MCP server. And then the setup instructions for your different AI IDEs like Cline, Cursor, and Windsurf, both with Docker. So if you set things up with Docker, there's one way you have to configure it versus the pure Python implementation, there's another way. And these configurations are dynamic to your operating system and the path that you have to things like the MCP server script. And then we have the last section right here. This is what I want to spend some time on. I created a dedicated section of this Archon interface just to detail all of the future iterations that I want to implement, because I don't want to just explain that briefly in the README. I want to put a huge emphasis on the big plans that I have for Archon. So I have this dedicated page outlining everything in excruciating detail because I want to show you the vision that I have and really hopefully get you behind this as well. So the first big thing that I want to knock out next with Archon going into version 5 is a multi-agent coding workflow. And what I mean by that, I have this graph here that outlines this nicely. I want to take the primary coding agent that I just showed you in the agentic workflow and split it up into sub-agents that specialize in different parts of the code generation, like one to create the prompt, another to define the tools for our agent, another to create the dependencies for things like database connections and API keys, and then one to create the instance of the agent itself and define things like the large language model to use. And I want to do this for two reasons. The first one is there is a huge use case with agentic workflows to have different LLMs tackling different parts of a problem, kind of like what we're seeing right here, and then come together to aggregate everything into a final result for the user. And again, Archon is partially a teaching tool, and so this is a great opportunity for me to demonstrate this huge use case in agentic workflows with something practical. And then the other reason I want to do this is, in general, just because you can give a lot of instructions to an LLM, just because the system prompt and all the tools can fit in the context window, doesn't mean you should do it, because LLMs can get overwhelmed when you give them too much to do. And so splitting our coder agent into different sub-agents means we have these specialized parts of the workflow that handle different things, so we should get much better results. And I've implemented these kind of workflows in other projects. It definitely does improve the results a lot. So I'm looking forward to version 5 a lot. And then going into version 6, I want to develop a tool library and example integration. So essentially giving pre-built tools and example agents to help Archon create new agents better. Because with the tool library, if we have something like this, I mean, this is a very preliminary look at what the configuration might look like. We have all these tools that are predefined for something like web search or querying a database. And so that way, when Archon builds the agent, it can use a tool that looks like this that's already defined in an agent in a very simple way, so that instead of Archon having to build that tool from scratch, it can pull it from the library and inject it right into the code. And so that way, we don't have to worry about hallucinating the creation of tools. When that's a tool that's already been built 1,000 times, we might as well just have that ready to be pulled in whenever an agent needs something like a weather tool or the ability to query a database. And it's a similar kind of idea with example agents. So instead of having to define this structure from scratch for an agent, it can look at an example agent like the weather agent that we see in the Pydantic AI documentation. So using this as its grounding point, what does a basic Pydantic AI agent look like? So it can use this and then build on top of it for any more complex use cases that we'd want to make with Pydantic AI. And then going into version 7, I want to include the LangGraph documentation within Archon's knowledge base so we have more than just Pydantic AI. And this is where we get into Archon being able to work with more and more frameworks. So as a starting point, adding in LangGraph as well. But then I want to add in Crew AI and Llama Index. I'll get into this more in another version, but this is kicking it off, essentially making it so that instead of it being hard-coded to use Pydantic AI for everything, we can start to incorporate other frameworks, allow the user to choose which framework Archon will build, and maybe even have it intelligently determine based on the agent that it's building, should it use just Pydantic AI, or should it use LangGraph and Pydantic AI together? And then once we have in other frameworks, maybe it chooses to use one of those instead, just depending on what we are building exactly. And so this is an example of a LangGraph agent, just showing more complex agentic workflows that you can't build with only Pydantic AI. And so adding in LangGraph to the capabilities of Archon is just going to make it be able to build more and more complex use cases, which we need for the agents that we have in the real world, solving these important problems for us. Then going into version 8, we get back to improving the agentic flow for Archon itself with self-feedback loops. Right now, Archon, when it produces the agent code, immediately goes to you as the user to give feedback. But what if you want it to autonomously iterate on the agent? Sometimes it knows better than you what it needs to work on, or maybe the hallucinations are kind of silly and it's easy enough for the LLM to just correct it itself. We want that kind of power within Archon, so that's what we're doing with version 8. And then going down into version 9 here, we have self-agent execution. This is going to be one of the more challenging parts of Archon, but I cannot wait for this because right now, any AI coding assistant, the generalists like Windsurf and Cursor, Archon, if they build the code for an agent, it doesn't execute in any way. There's no way to automatically hook up a database for RAG or to get another service installed like CRXNG for local web search. Like you don't have that functionality. And so I want to build that into Archon. So once it creates the code for the agent, and maybe gets the green light from the user that everything looks good, then it would use the local AI package, I've covered this on my channel a lot, to spin up an isolated environment with the database, like a vector database, a SQL database, web search capabilities. It'll have that all packaged together, ready for the AI agent to hook into. So we would create the agent as a container, bake it into a Docker Compose stack with all these other services, so it has this environment ready to execute right away. And this gets into so many more possibilities in the future as well, being able to automatically test and execute these agents and really improve that autonomous iteration. So it's more than just the LLM reasoning about the code that was outputted, but it can literally test the agent and then see any errors and work on it that way. So I just can't wait for this. And then I alluded to this a lot already, but for version 10, I want to implement multi-framework support. So Pydantic AI, LangGraph, LangChain, Agno, Crew AI, and Llama Index are all the big ones that I know of. And even though Pydantic AI and LangGraph are my favorites, I know that people have different preferences and there are reasons to use other ones, maybe if you want something more simple like Crew AI, for example. So I want Archon to support all of that. And then going into version 11, an autonomous framework learning process. So essentially, whenever Archon creates a good agent or defines good tools, and it iterates and tests and confirms that, I want it to add that to its examples into the tool library so that it can continuously give itself better examples and tools to have this self-improvement process. I think that would just be so cool. Maybe even doing things like adjusting its own system prompt as well as it iterates over time and realizes what makes the agents work the best. So very far out there. I mean, these last few that we have are definitely more advanced things, but I would love to get to this point. Also, probably a lot more versions coming later as well. We're up to version 13 already, but yeah, there's so many ways that we could take Archon much, much further even. And then going on to version 12, advanced RAG techniques. Because right now, the methods that I have for exploring the knowledge base with RAG, they work pretty well, but I haven't implemented that many advanced techniques. Things like hybrid search, re-ranking, query decomposition, or better chunking through things like hierarchical chunking. There's a lot of opportunities that we have here to make it so that Archon can understand and use the documentation for all of our different frameworks much better. And then the last version that I have, at least for now, is the MCP Agent Marketplace. So being able to take these agents that we've built with Archon and publish them to a marketplace, an MCP marketplace, so that other people can bring them in as sub-agents to use within their AI IDEs or any other MCP clients. So just like Archon is a tool, a sub-agent that an MCP client can use, the agents itself produces can also be used as sub-agents. It gets very meta here. Again, I don't want to dive into everything that would be involved with this, but I think this would just be so cool. It's just a way for everything that Archon creates to be reusable by other people and shared in something like in MCP Agent Marketplace. Then for future integrations, I don't know exactly which version these will fit into, but I want to integrate with these different services. So starting with Langsmith here, this is LangChain's tracing and monitoring platform. It just gives you a very good inside scoop with what's happening with your agentic workflows. It'll help us better debug Archon and the agents that Archon creates. So definitely want to integrate with Langsmith at some point. Also could use something like LangFuse as well. So there's a couple different options here, but since we're working with LangGraph as one of the core components to Archon, I think Langsmith certainly makes sense. And then also an MCP Marketplace, and this is different than version 13. So this is for publishing Archon agents to MCP marketplaces, but I'm talking about actually having Archon in MCP marketplaces so that people can use it as an MCP server directly through there, so they can run everything without having to go through my GitHub repo and get everything set up themselves. I think this would be super cool. And then also other frameworks besides Pydantic AI. Obviously, this is covered in version 10, so this one I know where it'd slot in. A couple of these others, I'm not sure exactly which version I'd add them in, but this one is very clear cut here. And then also other vector databases besides Supabase. A lot of really popular options that I have listed out here. I think it'd be good because people appreciate different vector databases for different things. Like Quadrant is faster than Supabase. You can also self-host it. Pinecone runs serverless. It's not open source, but it's very, very fast. So there's reasons to use different ones. It'd be good to integrate that as well. And then last of all, the local AI package, which I want to integrate specifically for version 9 when we have the self-agent execution. So I know where this one slots in as well, but this will just be so cool to tie everything with Archon to the local AI package that I also have been pouring my heart and soul into. So that is literally everything as far as future integrations and future iterations of Archon. So many exciting things planned. And yeah, if you're not pumped about this, I don't know what to tell you, because I myself am just so stoked for what Archon is now and what it's going to turn into as I build it out and as we build it out together. So that is Archon and the awesome plans that I have for it in a nutshell. And I encourage you to be a part of this journey. Follow along as I build it out, contribute if you're interested, and just try it out and suggest features for me. And the last thing that I want to say really quick is that Archon is the perfect example of what I try to do on my channel. I try to build agents that are complex enough to be powerful, practical, and not easily replaced, but also build them in a way where I can break down these complex topics into things that are easy to understand for you, so I can teach you best how to build AI agents. So if you appreciated this content and you're looking forward to more things Archon and AI agents, I would really appreciate a like and a subscribe. And with that, I will see you in the next video.